Imagine meeting someone who has never had Instagram, never checks TikTok before sleeping, never feels the urge to post a life update, and doesn't even know what their engagement rate is. In a world where social media feels almost required to exist, these people can seem mysterious. Some assume they're antisocial, out of touch, or hiding from society. But psychology tells a very different story. People who don't use social media aren't disconnected from reality. In many ways, they experience it more directly. The first thing researchers notice about non-users is their relationship with attention. Social media is designed to fragment focus. Notifications, infinite scrolling, and unpredictable rewards constantly interrupt thought patterns. People who avoid these platforms often develop stronger sustained attention simply because their brain isn't trained to expect interruption every few minutes. Over time, their concentration works more like a deep river instead of a shallow stream. Slower to start, but far more powerful once moving. This is why many non-users report reading more books, finishing long projects, or staying absorbed in conversations without the urge to check a phone. Another major difference lies in identity formation. Social media subtly shifts identity from internal to external validation. Instead of asking, "Do I like this?" the mind begins asking, "Will others like this?" But people who don't use social media rely more heavily on intrinsic self-evaluation. They build preferences privately. Their hobbies, tastes, and opinions evolve without immediate feedback loops. Psychologists call this an internal locus of evaluation. The sense that your value comes from your own judgment rather than audience approval. Because of this, non-users often appear unusually certain about what they enjoy. They're less likely to follow trends not because they resist change, but because their preferences aren't constantly recalibrated by public reaction. This also changes how they experience happiness. Social media intensifies social comparison. Even if we logically know posts are curated, the emotional brain treats them as real evidence of other people's lives. Without constant exposure to highlight reels, non-users compare themselves less frequently. As a result, their baseline mood tends to fluctuate less. They still feel envy, of course. Comparison is human. But it occurs in real situations rather than hundreds of times per day. Their happiness becomes more situational than algorithmically influenced. Interestingly, people who avoid social media often maintain fewer but deeper relationships. When communication isn't replaced by passive updates, it requires intentional effort. Instead of knowing what everyone ate for lunch, they ask directly. Conversations become longer because information isn't pre-shared. This creates what psychologists call active social bonding. Relationships form through shared time rather than shared content. To heavy users, this can look like social isolation. In reality, the emotional closeness per relationship is often higher even if the network size is smaller. There's also a difference in memory. Social media changes how the brain stores experiences. When we anticipate posting something, part of our attention shifts from living the moment to documenting it. Non-users experience events with less observational distance. They remember fewer details about how things looked on camera, but more about how they felt in real time. Their memories are more sensory and emotional rather than performative. That's why some people without social media describe events more vividly. They experience them instead of partially narrating them in their mind. Many assume people who avoid platforms lack curiosity about others, yet the opposite is often true. Their curiosity is selective instead of constant. Rather than consuming hundreds of micro-updates, they invest curiosity into fewer individuals. They might not know what acquaintances did today, but they deeply know what close friends think, fear, and dream about. Their social awareness operates in depth rather than breadth. There's also a psychological boundary component. Social media blurs private and public life. Thoughts once temporary become permanent records. Non-users maintain stronger mental separation between self and audience because no invisible crowd exists in their daily decisions. This reduces what psychologists call the imaginary audience effect, the feeling of being constantly watched. Without it, behavior becomes less performative. They may laugh louder, dress more comfortably, or pursue interests without considering how they appear to strangers. Another fascinating trait is boredom tolerance. Social media trains the brain to escape idle moments instantly. But boredom isn't useless. It's the starting point of creativity and reflection. People who don't rely on scrolling spend more time in unstimulated mental states. Their brain wanders more often, which strengthens imagination and problem-solving networks. Many creative insights happen not when thinking hard, but when nothing demands attention. Non-users experience this state more frequently. However, avoiding social media isn't always a rejection of technology or society. For some, it's a form of psychological self-protection. Highly sensitive individuals, introverts, or people prone to rumination may feel overwhelmed by constant social information. By removing the stream, they regulate emotional input. It functions less like isolation and more like noise reduction. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect is loneliness. Heavy users sometimes assume non-users must feel disconnected from the modern world. But loneliness isn't about quantity of interaction. It's about perceived emotional understanding. Because their interactions are more intentional, non-users often feel socially satisfied even with fewer total interactions. They miss information, yes, but they gain presence. In the end, people who don't use social media are not resisting society. They're simply engaging with it through older psychological channels: conversation, observation, memory, and direct experience. Their brains are shaped by fewer digital rewards and more continuous attention. They don't necessarily live better lives, just differently structured ones. And perhaps the real takeaway isn't that one way is superior, but that human psychology adapts rapidly to environments. Social media rewires perception of self, time, and relationships, while absence of it preserves older cognitive patterns we evolved with. So when you meet someone who has never posted a story or checked likes, you're not meeting someone detached from reality. You're meeting someone whose reality arrives unfiltered, one moment at a time.